to debate issues of public policy that are relevant, in this case, to Brazil. I'm the director of the Brazil Institute, and we are very happy to have with us this morning two experts on sustainable development, especially in the Amazon. They are Paulo Barreto, Senior Researcher for the Amazon Institute of the People and Environment, Amazon, and Steve Schwartzman, Director of Tropical Forest Policy at the Environmental Defense Fund. They have been working with issues related to the Amazon for more than 2 decades. And the subject today is land use and rural development in the Brazilian Amazon. Before Paulo starts his presentation, I would like to go around and ask people just to. We are a small group. We value quality, not quantity, at the Wilson Center, and I would like to start inviting people to introduce themselves so our speakers will know. Go ahead.
My name is Elton Lima, for Resource Management at IGB, Interamericana Development Bank. My name is Paulo Barreto, I'm environmental sustainability at
My name is Cristina Lois, I'm a reporter on the
Bruce Babbitt, I'm the past chairman of the World Wildlife Fund. I'm presently working at the Amazon Conservation Association.
And might I add, is a former Secretary of the Interior and the former Governor of Arizona. It's an honor to have you here, sir.
I'm Elizabeth Brito. I'm also an environmental specialist in the American Development Bank.
I'm land administration specialist for the World Bank.
Okay, so we go here now to a brief introduction.
Jeff Cole, I work for EPA.
John Thielmeyer, independent consultant, previously with USAID.
Sherry Lee.
William Castro, PhD student from Michigan State University.
And also we have Amanda Early, who is our intern here, and a student at Georgetown University. And you'll see coming in and out Renata Johnson, who is the program assistant, also from Brazil. So with that, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to ask Paulo to start us off. Just to alert Michael, I'm talking to the audiovisual people here. I think Paulo is going to walk around, so you guys with the camera, do your best. This one is.
Hello. Good morning for everybody. Thanks for having me. So what I'll do today is to tell what's going on in the Amazon, in Brazil, the fight against deforestation, what's going on, the recent developments there. As you know, deforestation is an old problem, and Brazil has tried to solve that using several strategies with mixed results. But recently, they have changed the approaches, and there is an increasing integration of public policies and also market pressure against deforestation. So I'll show these developments and the results in terms of deforestation reduction. Well, people usually deforest to make money. So there is a strong relationship between the variation of deforestation rates and the price of agriculture commodities. the price of agricultural commodities, especially beef. 75% of the area of the forest is allocated to cattle ranching, and some is allocated to soybeans and some subsistence agriculture. So you see in red here the deforestation rate, and in blue what the projected deforestation rate, only considering the variation of soy and beef. So they are very much alike, showing this strong relationship. And the Amazon has become a major space for increasing beef production. This is the growth of this is the total herd of cattle in Brazil. In blue is the rest of Brazil. In green is the Amazon. So you see here a strong growth in the region. It's more than 70 million cattle heads. It's about almost 3 heads of cattle for each person there. One big problem is that most of this deforestation is illegal, including several types of illegality. So people deforest within the legal reserve, which is the area that of each property that should be maintained as forest. People also deforest the riparian forests. They also, well, overall, it's no environmental license to deforest. They should get an environmental license. And also there are cases in several protected areas. This includes indigenous lands and also conservation units. Brazil has tried to solve this, the problem of deforestation using several strategies. One is increasing the area of protected areas. So here you see the cumulative area of protected areas in the Amazon. And there's a strong growth since 1988, and half of this is because of indigenous lands. The 1988 Constitution established very clear rights for indigenous people, so there was a growth there. And later, the other type of protected areas, usually conservation units, increased also. And there are evidences that deforestation inside protected areas is much less than outside. Several research showing that. Here is the distribution of the protected areas. The different colors are different classes. In this color here, brownish, is the indigenous lands. About 42% of the territory now is are protected areas. The other thing Brazil has increased is field inspections against deforestation based on the new, now not so new now, the environmental crimes law, which includes higher penalties against deforestation. So Brazil increased the issuing of fines, and this is the in blue here you see the total value of fines issued from 2001 to 2005, and very large increase, 1.5 billion reais in fines. It's a lot. In terms of numbers, it's about 6,000 to 10,000 fines per year within the Amazon. The problem is that the collection of fines is very low, so it's less than 5%. So the impact of this is that people say, well, IBAMA, which is the environmental agency, can come, but nothing's going to happen. So people continue to deforest. But one thing changed in the Brazilian government was saying, well, what we are doing in the recent year, it's working. Deforestation was declining since 2005. And I presented to the Minister of Environment, I said, it's declining, but in large part because of the decline of beef and soy price. And they said, well, we think it's because of our policies. But in the second semester of 2007, prices were rising again. And December 2007, deforestation had this large peak comparing to 2006. And the Brazilian government said, well, we really have the risk now of deforestation exploding. and especially the discussion about the food crisis. People all over the world will say we're going to have a food crisis, we have to increase production. And the people at the environmental ministry said we have a high risk of deforestation exploding now. So they really decided to change the approach against deforestation. And one thing that was important, they say we have to target the cattle sector because they are the ones that are promoting most of the deforestation. The other thing that was included in the discussion, we can stop deforestation and continue to increase production of cattle. And I think most of you have visited the Amazon. The productivity of cattle there in most of the areas is very low. It's less than 1 head per hectare. So we have areas that sometimes have more bush than grasses. It's very ugly actually. But the potential is to really increase production, have a better pasture, and have increased productivity. So this was included in the strategy. We can stop deforestation and continue production. The other thing that was important was the increasing debate about climate change. Contribution of emissions from the Amazon is very high, about 40% of the Brazilian emissions, and a very low contribution to the GDP. So the other factor was we can reduce deforestation, continue production, and not have a large impact on overall in GDP. So government really improved the strategies against deforestation. One issue was, this was in end of 2007, beginning 2008. They said the credit now is going, public credit and private credit, only for properties that have a land title or are starting to regularize the land situation, and also the ones that are starting to regularize the environmental situation. A very important new thing was the embargo of areas illegally deforested. So if they find someone deforesting, they now go with a GPS and they have the map of that area, and this is available now on the internet. You go there and see all the list of people, and they release this list of these areas. Moreover, they say people that buy from the producers in that list, they are liable now to sanctions. And also another point, they increased confiscation of products related to illegal logging or illegal deforestation. And I look at the data. Well, another thing they did was they focused control on the 36 municipalities here in yellow that are responsible for, that we are responsible for 50% of the deforestation. So I looked at the data in terms of the focus of confiscation, for example. You see here it's the cumulative cases in 2007 and 2008. So you see in red in 2008, they really increased the confiscation and the embargo. This is in the 36 municipalities. In the other municipalities, you see that they increased the higher growth here than here. And also when they started the policy in the beginning of 2008. So this was very important. And they have one case that was kind of symbolic and got a lot of media attention, was the confiscation of 3,000 cattle inside a protected area in southern Pará state, which is the champion of deforestation. And this was big, especially because they were able to auction this. They sold the cattle 2 months after the confiscation. And if you follow what goes on in terms of application of penalties in Brazil, 2 months is very fast. And this was I visited this area afterwards, and actually I talked to the guy that was the owner of the cattle, and everybody there agreed that this was really a major change, because in the past they would say, well, nothing's going to happen. They also confiscated 3,000 cubic meters of logs in another municipality, and they took the logs out of the municipality, and also they auctioned afterwards. So they started really to applying this with an immediate impact on the pockets of the people there. So we also measured the results of that. This is the difference of deforestation in 2008 and comparing to 2007, monthly, and within the 36 municipalities and the other municipalities. But overall, you see this is the decline of deforestation in both municipalities. It's greater. It was greater in the municipalities where they focus the control, and you see a clear link of the schedule of decrease with the operations there. They call it pirate cattle. This 3,000 cattle was captured, restriction of credit. And it's very interesting that it started here just afterwards that. And one thing that is very important, the decline started prior to the economic crisis that developed after September. So there's a mix here of the policy also and from the economic crisis. But it's very important to register that this was already begun before the economic crisis. So in this period, there was this more than, around 3,300 square kilometers reduction of in deforestation that year. But things continued. The public prosecutor, the federal public prosecutor in Pará, used this new law, the embargo one, to get the people along the chain, the beef chain. They started 21 lawsuits against 21 ranchers that continued raising cattle in the embargoed area, and against the slaughterhouses that bought from them. This is in Pará State. Another thing that they did was very interesting. They sent letters to people that were buying from the slaughterhouses and said, you buy from these people, they are buying from illegal areas. If you continue, you're going to have lawsuits against you. And this included some big guys such as Walmart and major supermarket chains in Brazil. And this had a very interesting impact. Greenpeace in parallel launched this report. Maybe you have heard about it. It's basically showing what was going on in terms of illegal production. The consequences there, the retailers and the industry, they stopped buying cattle from these slaughterhouses immediately. And the slaughterhouse, they signed an legal agreement basically saying we are only going to buy from the ranchers that start procedures to follow the legislation. And one very important element of that is that the farmer has to go to the environmental agency and they have to register the map of their property saying, okay, this is my deforested area, this is my forest, and this is available now on the internet. You can go there and find. For the guys that want to continue to buy, to sell cattle. And in the midterm, they have to have a plan to restore the areas that they have deforested illegally. And one critical element of the agreement is this. Usually the public prosecutors, they have these agreements, but they don't have people, neither the money to supervise the implementation of that. But in this agreement, they included that the state government has to hire independent audit to see the implementation. And this is going to be up to 5 million reais, roughly $2.8 million per year just for this audit. Because there are, thousands of farms and everything. So this is critical because it's not, the slaughterhouse that are going to say, this is working, this is going to be independent audit. There are other developments there. BNDES, which is a major Brazilian public bank, they revised the guidelines for investing in this sector, the environmental and social guidelines after that. Sorry. Greenpeace worked with the largest slaughterhouses in Brazil, the four largest one. One is the largest in the world, to stop buying from newly deforested areas. And basically, the agreement is very similar to the one signed with the Public Prosecutor's Office. And this is valid for the whole Amazon, not only Pará State. But the Public Prosecutor's Office in Mato Grosso is also working to have a legal binding agreement. This is an informal one, but they are working to have the same kind of agreement in Pará, in the other states. And the Brazilian Supermarket Association, they launched a certification program for the solar houses. They're only going to buy for people that have audits, certification, several topics. The results of these new developments is in 2009, deforestation decreased 45%. It was decreasing, and 7,000 square kilometers is still very high, but it was a very important decrease. Of course, it's a combination of these policies and also the economic crisis. So in terms of deforestation, we see that there has been an impact. The other thing we can look to see if there's an impact is the number of properties that are the guys that are going out to register at the State Environmental Agency to be able to sell to slaughterhouses. In June 2009, less than 800 people were there, and this month, actually yesterday, 7,500. So there was a major increase of people getting into the system because they want to continue to sell. And this is a major development because this is called CARDS, the cadastre of the environmental, the rural properties. Exists for many years, but very few people pay attention to that. We can ask all the ranchers are going to comply because supposedly in Pará there are 80,000, so this is small. In terms of numbers, in terms of the total size, it's likely this is a larger share of the total because the environmental agency has said that the ones that are going there to register are the larger ones. We have asked them the data to look at that. But basically, development here is going to depend on what's going to happen with all these agreements. And one interesting new thing that happened past year with all these developments, Walmart had a very interesting strategy. They made a lemonade of the lemon because Walmart was, involved in that because they bought from the slaughterhouses. And Walmart had a very interesting role in going with the other, big supermarket within the Brazilian Association of Supermarket and say, we have to respond, have to stop buying. And actually, in the end of the year, Walmart was received this is the Walmart guy in Brazil, the big boss there. They got this award, the Sustainable Company of the Year in Brazil, from this business magazine in Brazil. And they opened the report talking about the agreement they had in the cattle sector. So now you have this intricate relationship between the market and the legislation and also the reputation of the companies. So it's not only the matter of following the legislation, but now these guys have a big stake in this in terms of reputation. So it's not only now a matter of the law. And the other thing is there's going to be independent audit. So it's not only this guy saying we are doing good, but this is going to happen. And now several people are working with the public prosecutor to develop the terms of reference for this audit. So it's going to be a lot of scrutiny regarding that. So I think the future is going to depend a lot of the developments here, and I think this is critical. And also I think it's critical to move beyond stopping deforestation to have a broader view in terms of sustainable production. And I think developments now are mostly in this area of environmental enforcement, reputation of the companies against involved in with all the players, banks, ranchers, slaughterhouses, retail. But I think we need to expand this to really look at, okay, what the producers need to move forward in terms of increasing productivity and stopping deforestation. And there are several issues that are very important in terms of land titling. People to invest, they have to have a secure situation in terms of land title. And I have worked with Malcolm Childers here in the World Bank. We have a report on that showing the situation there that is very bad. The environmental licensing situation is difficult because the agency, it's only in the capital. Only now they are moving to the municipalities. Research and development, cattle tracking. So there are several issues now that are very important so these guys can move forward. And tomorrow there will be a major meeting in Paragominas in eastern Pará where they are going to start these kinds of discussions to move forward. So I think the big challenge now is we still have the challenge of making sure that deforestation is going to decrease, but also to have a sustainable industry there installed. So with that I close, and then I think Steve is going to make some comments, and I think there will be time for discussions later.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Paulo, for that fascinating presentation. I mean, I really found it extremely informative. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I guess as Paulo pointed out, I've worked on the Amazon for a long time, so I think I'll just briefly kind of take advantage of getting old here to sort of put this in a broader context over time. I mean, thinking back, kind of things that have changed in the Amazon over the last 20 years. I remember about 20 years ago being at a presentation at the Wilson Center, not here because it wasn't here yet, where a very well-known and articulate and prestigious Brazilian journalist was asked to talk about deforestation in the Amazon, and somebody from São Paulo, and his attitude was, deforestation in the come on, I know it's of interest to you all here, but face it, in Brazil, the Amazon is a totally minor question. Nobody cares about this. We are interested in development. That's not happening there. It's happening in São Paulo, in the center south. So, I hate to burst your balloon, but this is just not a pertinent issue at all. And which at the time was not an uncommon sort of attitude or opinion. Obviously, we are in a different world today, and I think that there are a lot of reasons why that's the case, but just amongst the things that have changed, that have brought us to the point that Paulo has described so well here, I mean, one of them I think is the emergence of technically capable research-based NGOs like Amazon, and maybe 4 or 5 others, some at a state level, some at a kind of regional level, that have been able to not only do the kind of policy and analysis and political economy and understanding the drivers of deforestation to better inform government agencies who have benefited a lot from this and whose capability has also grown a great deal over this period, but provide a kind of transparency to the basic science of what's going on in the Amazon. When the government publishes the deforestation rate every year, there are at least 3 or 4 independent NGO research institutes that can download it from the internet and say, well, no, the government said this, but we say that, because they have this capability, which means that the science gets better. But also, there's a real transparency to the discussion. So that's been terrifically important. Another change that Paulo pointed out here that's really critical is this massive growth in the extent of protected areas, particularly indigenous lands. And I think there again, Brazil has a kind of singular situation. That's if you look at the creation of indigenous lands over the last 30 years, but also extractive reserves, the protected areas managed by traditional forest communities, which is an idea that that didn't exist 20 years ago, was created by Chico Mendes and the rubber tappers, and also other kinds of sustainable use areas, and then strictly protected areas. The dynamic in Brazil is really very different than it is in a lot of other places. If you look at the tropical conservation literature around the world, there are reams of studies about conflicts between local peoples and conservation on various levels under various aspects, something that occurs in Brazil as well. But the dynamic in Brazil has been different. There's the emergence of the socio-environmental movement. They are allied to indigenous peoples, are supporting specific indigenous struggles, the rubber tappers, smallholders, increasingly over time, taking on an identity themselves as sustainable users, environmentalists whose land use is more sustainable than the official development model proposed and subsidized by the government. These have been fundamental to this vast expansion of protected areas. The 3,000 pirate cattle that were confiscated were in the Exército Terra do Meio, and one of the several areas amounting to nearly 5 million hectares that was created immediately after Sister Dorothy Stang was assassinated in 2005, after having worked for 20 years with smallholders on their land rights, but also having come along with this the smallholders and colonists social movement of the Trans-Amazon Highway to position herself, the movement more broadly, as an environmental movement. So much so that this area was created after she was killed. So that's been terrifically important. I think beyond that, the fact of global warming, which is becoming clearer and clearer to people in the Amazon. Anyone who lived in the state of Amazonas in 2005, I think, saw and lived through the massive drought there where people have never seen it, have seen that things are changing. I think there's an awareness of the possibilities. Maybe not everyone has seen the models projecting savanization of a potentially very large part of the Amazon, but there's an awareness that the climate is changing and there's a need to do something about it. And this process that Paulo has described of taking action, taking effective control over deforestation, or beginning to take effective control over deforestation, is absolutely new and revolutionary in a sense. I think since before 2000, probably what correlated most closely with deforestation rates in the Amazon was national GDP, with kind of the insertion of Amazon commodity markets into a global economy. After 2000, the connection is probably much more direct with commodity prices and deforestation. And in 2007, I think, with the evolution of the National Plan to prevent deforestation, we saw for the first time a real attenuation of that link between growth and deforestation. Maybe not a complete break. And this has had, I think, major effects in a lot of places. Just looking at the international scene, Brazil's role in the international climate negotiations has changed dramatically since 2008, particularly. It's actually somewhat before that, because of the fact that the Brazilian government has come to the conclusion, at least important sectors, including the president, that Brazil is able to control its deforestation in the Amazon on a national level. That certainly was not the case 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, much less 20 years ago. And they come to that conclusion based on some real data. Now, the challenge is you have two counter tendencies. You have markets reacting, selecting for and rewarding good practices. Here you have the prospect of potentially large-scale payment for ecosystem services through a possible mechanism for compensating tropical countries for reducing deforestation in the climate negotiations, possibly in U.S. climate change legislation, should the Congress come to pass it, or even discussions between various states, like the state of California, which does have a climate change law and is designing a cap and trade system with various Amazon states. These things are all creating potentially very large-scale incentives for sustainability for the end of deforestation. At the same time, it's an election year. There is a plan for accelerated growth, PAC, which one of the candidates is counting on very heavily as a ticket to the presidency, and mobilization by the large ranchers lobby, the agricultural lobby in the Brazilian Congress to undermine environmental legislation. So it's an interesting race or confrontation between these two trends, and the outcome is not clear. But certainly the possibility of this level of policy and political economic conflict going on is something new as well. It certainly didn't exist 20 years ago. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Steve. Before I invite questions, I just wanted to, just to underline something that was said here. Those of us of a certain age remember that in 1972, in the first global environmental meeting by the UN, the Brazilian Interior Minister, a general by the name Costa Cavalcanti, went to Stockholm and invited companies, etc., to come and deforest, to come and pollute. 15 years after that, when Steve and Barbara Bramble brought Chico Mendes to the United States, this was basically seen as an impossibility. The idea that the Amazon was going to be destroyed and there was nothing we could do about it was very much alive, and so much that the next year Chico was assassinated. So as I was listening to the presentation, it's obvious now, but this has to do with democracy. I think this has to do with the rule of law that is being finally implemented and tried with, and in certain areas that what Paulo described with, which we know that we face in Brazil, is the problem of impunity. And when people become accountable, they respond, because it seems that the system responds and is working. With that general observation, I would like to invite questions, but I would like that you identify yourselves before you ask.
Hi, I'm John Pielmeyer. I served with USAID in Brazil in the 70s and 90s, and one of the things in the 90s, we had a relatively small program, but we were able to work with groups like Amazon, with using Chris Ewell and others as mentors, and Dan Nebstedt, and Paulo, I think, was a junior researcher at that point. Glad to see him as a senior researcher. Two questions that were surfacing then, I'm wondering how they've developed, because in terms of the long-term sustainability of these programs, what you described as a national-led effort, although you did mention a prosecutor in the state of Pará. Two questions. To what degree is the legal system built up with the capacity to deal with legal issues not only in Pará but across the Amazon? And secondly, to what degree are you getting local political support? Governors can be elected that could easily start dashing these kinds of actions. To what degree do you have more local political support in the judicial system to help take these actions and continue with them if leadership changes at the national level?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe take one more and then I'll respond to two at once.
Thank you, Paulo. I'm Connie Campbell from USAID, the Latin America Caribbean Bureau, and as with John, I have a two-part question. Mine has to do with the potential for transferring the experience that you've shown us across different commodities, and how that relates to behavior change. If I understand it, we're looking at a process where the decreased deforestation is due to an evolution of enforcement the threat of enforcement, and now what we're seeing is initial market incentives for increased production that could be in part attributable to decreased deforestation. So my two-part question is, first of all, knowing that there are similar purely now voluntary mechanisms in the market for soy, do you see the potential for beef as a major commodity to continue to move such that we eventually might see actually price premiums such that there would be sufficient economic incentive for decreased deforestation? And then secondly, I'm thinking about being able to create those carrots in the Brazil environment and what that means crossing over to a third commodity being illegal logging, which is the primary driver of deforestation in the Andean Amazon and in the far western parts of Brazil. Do you see opportunities, either enforcement with this example and or market driven, to attack that dynamic, which is quite distinct in the Andean Amazon?
Mm-hmm. Okay, about the justice system there, actually I have studied this. One thing that I did was, okay, the fines there, people are not paying. What are the motives of people not paying? What are the failures in the administrative procedures or the judicial procedures? So I have looked at that extensively, and there are several problems within the procedures within the environmental agency and also in our judicial systems, and I have a detailed analysis of that. And this kind of analysis have also promoted changes within IBAMA, for example. They have now streamlined the procedures for actually this idea of confiscation and having expedite procedures for confiscation. This is the kind of thing that came out of this analysis, showing the hurdles that they had before. So I think there are some evolution there, but in terms of the federal justice, the presence in the Amazon is very poor. And actually have met with high-level people within the judicial system in Brazil, and now they want to create what's called environmental courts. In Brazil, you can specialize some of the courts, so they have decided to create 9 environmental and land issues courts in the 9 state capitals in the Amazon. They had known before, so this just was initiated this year. And they had a previous experience with environmental courts in southern Brazil, and reduced by half the time of proceedings there. And the Brazilian justices are under a lot of pressure to improve efficiency. So this is part of a larger movement to increase efficiency, and the environmental sector has gained some attention. So it's very weak, but there are signs that they can improve in the near future, slowly. In terms of local support, there are some changes. Usually, local people, they go against all these, environmental measures. Some state governments now, they are considering that the pressure against deforestation can be a benefit in the future because of the idea of payment for environmental services related to, a climate agreement. In the case of actually the states, governors in the Amazon, they are meeting with state governors in other parts of the world, including California. So they are trying to arrange some kind of agreement. So you see some change because of the pressure, but also because of the possibility of benefits in the future. You don't see much of this in terms of at the local level, the mayors, for example. But with this past year, with the focus on the 36 municipalities, they reacted badly. But one had the idea, okay, what I need to do to get out of this list. So, and he went, going to the NGOs, to the Minister of the Environment, what I need to get out of the list. And this meeting tomorrow is going to be in this municipality because they decrease deforestation. And one thing they have to do, they have to have 80% of the properties inside this environmental cadastre. And it's likely that they're going to get this week. So it's likely that they're going the first one to get out of the list. So this kind of initiative may be positive in the future because they are also hearing about this idea of payment for environmental services. Some people have gone there to try to invest there in reforestation. So people are starting to look at possibilities. And Paragominas is kind of maybe an exception because Vale, this big mining company, they want to invest in reforestation there. But in order to do this, they require everything clear, land titling, environmental license, and everything. So without being this list, they are not going to get there. In terms of transferring to other commodities, in terms of the soybean agreement, it was all informal. But now they are saying, well, this cattle agreement is much better because we have this pressure from the public prosecutor's office. And they see that things are moving faster in the cattle sector now because of the pressure from the public prosecutor's office. Maybe there will be some development in terms of having a legal binding agreement also in the case of soy in the future. In terms of logging had, I think, advanced before in case of Brazil, before the cattle sector with a certification. But the market for certified timber was relatively limited. So it's not a full incentive for everybody. What's new now is that with this legal pressure, you can include everybody in the same boat. It's not only because the market, this premium market is relatively small. In the case of Brazil, most of the meat in the timber is for the national market. So this legal pressure is important. In terms of beef, Brazil exports about 25%. In terms of the timber from the Amazon, it was about 16% last time we had data. We are finishing now for the data from the last year. But in summary, I think we need a combination of legal and the market pressure.
Paulo, in your remarks, you referred, I think, briefly to a land titling study being done by Amazon.
Yes.
Could you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, overall, the land situation is kind of messy. There's a lot of people occupying public lands without having a title, with different understandings of what are the actual rights that they have. It's called poseiro. It's a landholder without a formal title. And government has tried to solve this with several issues, several approaches. So we have land people occupying without title. You also have people with titles that are fake. So you have to clear both sides. Give title for people that really have the rights to have title and clear the fake titles. The government has tried this for several years, but with very, poor results. The pressure is growing because everything now depends on having a title, for credit or for environmental license or investments from the private sector, everything. So Brazil has now a new law regarding how to solve the situation for the federal lands, these land holdings. But the law is kind of risky because it says that in some cases they are going to donate land for these people that have occupied land. In other case, they are going to the price for land title is going to be lower than the market price. So this may be an incentive for people to occupy new areas and say, okay, we're going to have a discount in the future, or the government is going to donate land. kind of risky. We're starting to study that to see what are the developments there. But what's new is that the government had this policy, and later we had this, in parallel, this environmental policy that's building pressure for people to go after having the land title. Because in the end, in the past, actually they didn't have much incentive to go after the title because the government was not, they didn't buy the land, they were not paying rent, so it was basically for free. So it doesn't matter if I have a title or not. The market was buying the products. So now they are starting to have some incentive to go after the land title. So it's all new and it's very dynamic. We are starting to study these developments after this new public prosecutor agreement.
On one verification, when you mentioned that when you refer to federal lands, are you referring to national forests or national forests and indigenous territory?
No, the lands, we have protected areas. They are formally established, but we also have what is called idle land. It's public land without established use. And people occupy this land for, these people, some went there with incentive from government, and some was spontaneous. They say, well, the government is giving land in the Amazon, I'm going to go there. Several people also for speculation. This federal law relates to this, what is called idle land.
And the indigenous lands are better protected?
Most of the indigenous land, they have the situation cleared now, but there are still lands that are indigenous, but they haven't been, in Brazil they say, recognized. So they have not been given, proper title or demarcation. And so there are problems still in some of indigenous lands. In some areas, yes. Someone there.
Are you in your institute analyzing alternatives to combating cattle ranching or soya production, something that makes more attractive to preserve a forest with market ways? I don't know how is the carbon trading, something that because this service for land preservation, this is very small, it's not very widespread, and how are you managing with this? Because until they discover something, it will be perhaps be too late.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I started my career studying, comparing the predatory logging with what would be the best practices in terms of costs and benefits, and also in terms of the ecological impacts, and it was with USAID funding in 1990. And the result was, okay, it's technically feasible, people can make money, but the rate of return of the investment is lower than if you deforest. So it's using for timber. So using for timber, you can have sustainable use, but it's usually with less profitable. Now is with the discussion, okay, if you include the carbon payment, maybe it's going, it's more profitable, but we don't have that. We still don't have payments for carbon. So some people now, I have talked with farmers last week, and they say, okay, I'm waiting for this. I'm not going to the forest and wait for some carbon credits. So if you have some ideas, you're welcome.
Yeah, maybe just to the issue of carbon crediting. I mean, there's both in recent years, the Brazilian federal government and a number of the state governments have been very active in trying to move this discussion along on the international and the national level. And Brazil's national position has changed a great deal. So for well, before 2003, really the government was not interested in discussing deforestation in the context of the climate negotiations at all. That position has changed very substantially. In, 2004, Brazil in Nairobi, at the Conference of the Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, Brazil proposed a fund in order to raise money internationally in exchange for demonstrated reductions in deforestation. In 2008, after Brazil announced a voluntary national target for reducing its deforestation below historical rates, below the average of 1996 to 2005, the Norwegian government responded by committing $1 billion if Brazil would continue to meet its target. You now have, just last summer, the Amazon Governors Forum, with all 9 Amazon state governors, wrote a letter to the president, first of all, declaring that they're in favor of zero deforestation in the Amazon, and second of all, asking the federal government to change its position to make it possible for them to get access to the carbon market. So they're pushing, and as Paulo mentioned, a number of them are in discussions with the state of California, as well as a number of Indonesian provinces, to try and design rules to allow reduced deforestation to come into California's compliance market. The problem is, the only real compliance market in the world, which is in the European Union, deforestation is not welcome yet.
I have an additional comment on the reduction of deforestation. I think actually that's going to be harder to reduce the remaining deforestation. If you look at one thing that is amazing for me is, well, we celebrated the reduction, but it's actually amazing that we had that amount in an economic crisis and with all these new measures against deforestation. To me, this was the point. It's 700,000 hectares is a lot. And my hypothesis now is that you have smaller deforestation, and some of this related to subsistence, but some are within land reform projects, people that are occupying some fringe of the Amazon. So I think you have to continue with the enforcement, but I think we're going to see it's harder to impose the enforcement to poorer people. So you have to have increase the combination of incentive and enforcement, including deforestation, REDD programs. I think it's going to be very important now to really have zero deforestation.
Thank you. John Redwood, consultant to the World Bank and the IDB. Paulo, first of all, I apologize because I came in late, and if you've already covered my question, again, apologies. But I'm curious to know whether Amazon or other research groups have done any systematic studies, and this is in the context of global commodity markets and environmental footprints of other nations, about the linkages between Chinese pigs and deforestation in the Amazon. By which I mean the extent to which expansion of soybean in the Cerrado soybean frontier, if you like, has pushed the cattle frontier, and we know the links between ranching and deforestation, which I'm sure you discussed. But again, sort of tracing this back and looking really at the global linkages through markets that may be totally driven by economic growth occurring in places very distant from Brazil.
Yeah, I began with graph showing the strong link between deforestation rate and the price of soybean and cattle. And most of the area is deforested for cattle. Some is subsistence, but there's a link, a displacement of soybeans pushing cattle to the Amazon, soybeans in center south of Brazil. So this link is there. So they are both, Brazil became the main, in terms of volume, beef exporter, and is a main exporter of soybeans. So we have both things growing at the same time.
But again, you mentioned that most of the consumption of beef was internal, and the same with timber, but in the case of soy, I think it's mainly external. So that it really is global demand that is a factor in this and driving this, and whether those linkages people are generally aware of in Brazil.
Yeah, in the case of beef, the additional growth in the recent years was related to exports, because Brazil was kind of stable, small exports. About 5% only of total volume was exported. We had problem with foot and mouth disease, but also the other marks. The mad cow disease had an impact because it opened some of the markets. So Brazil occupied those. And the other countries that could produce beef were not able to increase production, such as Argentina and Australia, for example. In case of Argentina, they love so much meat that they imposed extra tax for exports, so they can eat meat. Brazil didn't do that. We had the space to increase beef production in the Amazon. So there was a link there also. Yes.
With the agreement about the cadastre that most of the
Ranchers they have.
The ranchers have to cadastre. I wanted to going a little further into that, because just the cadastre would open their agreement to continue selling, I mean, the cattle or to the slaughterhouse, but the property not necessarily is following under the legislation. So most of them are illegal in terms of having deforested what's supposed to be the protect or the legal reserves. So the next big question is how to promote and push, or what is the government doing in terms of pushing for reforestation or compensation for that, especially for the mid-size or the smaller ranchers that usually claim that, I mean, financial possibilities, and what is the agreement that each one has to comply in terms of time frame to actually continue to be allowed to, or certified in a way, not certified, but allowed to be within the market of the production chain.
Yeah, this question is very important. The agreement is, they have a schedule with several topics, and I participated of the negotiation that led to this agreement, and my suggestion there was, okay, first stop deforestation, and then have time to start restoration and the other issues. And to stop deforestation, the most basic thing is not to buy from new deforested areas, and also to have them, on the cadastre, so you can see them, because now we don't see them. So by being in the cadastre, you can now take the polygons of the areas and use satellite image to see if they are deforested or not. So this is the first thing. And then, so now starting now in February, from now on, they cannot sell if they are not on the cadastre, so in the cadastre. And then there is a schedule for getting the full environmental license, because being the cadastre is not the full environmental license, it's just the beginning. And they have a schedule to do this. They have to have the full environmental license within 2 years. But within 1 year, they have to already to submit all the information to get the full environmental license. And one information is, okay, what is my plan to restore the areas that I have deforested illegally? Or if there's a plan for compensation outside the property. So this is within 1 year, and they have to have full license in 2 years. And the most complicated issue is the land tenure situation. And because of that, the time frame is longer. It's, I think it's 4 or 5 years to have full. But they cannot, they go hand in hand, because the main thing for them is to be in the cadastre. If they are there, the other pressures are going to come. So I think this was the main advancement. Of course, it's more complicated in terms of the land tenure, especially because of the slow response from the Brazilian government. Because INCRA, which is the land agency, or the state agencies, land agencies, they are poorly equipped or they don't have staff. So you have to transform these institutions before having full speed titling there.
If I can get a
Just
second.
to say, I have a table with this schedule. Everything that, if you want, I can pass to you. It's very long.
Thank you for a second opportunity. One thing, you ended your talk talking about looking more at the production side. How livestock producers produce without deforestation? That moves back to the question, I think, of degraded lands, which is part of REDD also. Mm-hmm. What, if anything, do you see happening in Brazil in terms of experimentation with rehabilitation of degraded lands and utilization of those lands for livestock production?
Yeah, there are research in Embrapa, the Brazilian Agriculture Research has a lot of results on that. But in some cases, they would say, the farmer would say, well, cattle doesn't pay the investments to restore production. Of course, if they had more space to occupy land for free, nothing is going to pay. But actually, I visited Paragominas. The bottom photo there in the right side is a farm I visited 2 weeks ago. It's state-of-the-art pasture management, and the guy is doing, and he is actually now his neighbors are imitating him because he's using these technologies. And the big question is, what is the rate of return of the investment in this? And this is actually what I'm studying now, is what are the costs and benefits of doing everything that the law requires and also using the best agricultural practices. So I think there is information there. We need to improve our understanding of the economics of that. But the pressure is, if they don't use the best practices, basically production is going to slow because they have less space to expand.
Thank you very much. I have no technical knowledge at all of this, but I'm interested in the politics of this because I'm quite interested in what kind of political support, where it came from for the policy changes you described in 2007. There were significant policy changes, increased enforcement, but we're only talking about 2 or 3 years, and there's still considerable deforestation going on. And we know that the economic crisis has contributed to the decline in deforestation, apart from policies, you said yourself. So I was quite interested. President Lula has never had any great interest in the Amazon. He's never demonstrated any great interest. The PT has never had the Amazon high on its agenda or problems of deforestation. Marina Silva resigned in frustration with the administration. Carlos Mink, the new Minister of Environment, was really more interested in the Mata Atlântica than he was in the Amazon, though I think he's improved, perhaps more than we expected. The PT candidate Dilma has no known commitment to problems of the Amazon as far as I'm aware, and there are these countervailing pressures all the time, the demand for economic development, the demand for increased consumption amongst the Brazilian, half the Brazilian population still classified as poor, and joining Class C and increasing production, including consumption of meat. And just related to that, in terms of where will there be some political pressure to maintain the significant changes that have been introduced, is it really the case that the legal Amazon has a population of 25-30 million? When you read Mangabeira Unga's report on the Amazon, and now it's followed by all Brazilian politicians, we do have to think about the 25-30 million people who live in legal Amazon. They have rights to improve their economic conditions. I'm always amazed at that figure. It's a dramatically different figure from, say, 10, 15 years ago. Is it actually the case? That was a subsidiary question about demography. but I'm more interested in the question of political will from the center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there are several points related to that. I don't know if you were here when I presented the data showing the, well, when was this transition? Because this debate, okay, we need to deforest, we have to feed people, we don't have enough land. This kind of argument was kind of weakened with showing the data. The area that is open is already very big. It's more than 700,000 square kilometers. They can increase production in this area without further deforestation. So this kind of debate increased in the Amazon, in Brazil. Even Lula said that, the Minister of Agriculture said that. So the idea of that we need to deforest to feed people was fading away because of just seeing the data. The amount of land was poorly used, was too big. Brazilian society has increased pressure, against deforestation. And also there is a role of international pressure. And actually I talked with a guy that has participated of several of these important meetings, including Lula and Dilma Rousseff, which is the chief of staff there. And one thing that he said, I asked him actually, this guy, why Lula is taking these measures, and he said, well, one of the things is he gets annoyed when he travels internationally. Now he's a kind of seen as a statesman and gets a lot of compliments all over the world, but every time people ask him about the Amazon. So he's not going to be a full international figure without solving the problem of deforestation. This was very interesting to hear from this guy that was working there. The issue of Marina was very important because she left just after releasing all these new policies. But the reaction was so big against her that she got weak. And Lula was kind of, all this pressure from the agribusiness sector, and she was kind of shaky to implement. She said, I'll go away. Since she left, Lula was in a situation that he could not go back. So Mink came, said, I have to do everything was in place. I cannot go back. So the fact that Marina left was very important in terms of the mobilization of public debate to be able to implement the new policies. And this was as a role of the Brazilian society in that, because she could have left and nothing, just go back to the old policies. And I think it was very important. And since she left and they started the debate about she becoming also a candidate for president, Dilma, which is who is now a candidate, she's getting greener. So it's very interesting to see this is playing a role also in the presidential debate. And it's this guy that is working close to these people. He says very clearly that the fact that she left has changed Dilma's position.
Paulo, let me jump in and just ask you something about, since all our presidential candidates are in the desenvolvimentista camp, we don't have all of the other kind, Serra, Dilma, Marina, and Ciro. Talk about the other two. Do you see do you see continuity here? Do you see, under Serra, São Paulo, for instance, adopted a law on emissions? There's a registry. There is, it points to carbon markets. But, São Paulo doesn't have, we used to have forest there, the forest that Carlos Mink likes to talk about, the Mata Atlântica. But what is if you could use your crystal ball and see what is coming in terms of the presidential debate?
If they are going to maintain the policies?
Is this going to be part of the debate in your assessment? Is this important?
Add something quickly to your question, because I think it's
Renata is bringing.
Well, just in addition to Paulo's question, which is sort of the short-term political thing, going back to Paulo, what you just said about Lula as an international figure and Brazil's aspiration to be in the club of, you know, the G9 or whatever it would be, or 10 or 12. You know, this is an ongoing geopolitical aspiration. Perhaps the other candidates are not as enamored with, you know, this as Lula is at the moment, but certainly the you know, this aspiration will continue, and the idea that Brazil, in order to be kind of a player, and similar pressures on China, by the way, in terms of environment, it really does have to control certain things, including in this case particularly deforestation in the Amazon. So whether this also will be part of the presidential debate and the policies going forward in your view?
Yeah, so the political context, I think deforestation now is in the debate, and there is national pressure against it, and also international. And I think any candidate now, they know that they have to pay attention to this subject. And Serra is also talking with people in this area. So I think he's going to be in the debate, and Marina is, you know, she's going to be a candidate also. So I think the debate is there. And I should say that the pressure is not only, you know, the president candidate, but there are other bodies within the Brazilian state that are important in this. And one is public prosecutors, but also there's another body which is Brazil is called TCU, which is the Brazilian Auditing Office for Federal Money. They also do, they make analysis of how the Brazilian government is managing programs in the Amazon. So they issue also recommendations, but in some cases they have legal binding instructions. For example, INCRA, the land agency, if they are distributing land illegally, which are related to deforestation, if they are not managing the conservation units well, so they have also reports. So there are several sources of pressure. It's not only from the, you know, the national public debate, but there are other mechanisms for formal pressure against you know, people in the executive branch.
Just briefly, this national international dynamic is really quite different these days. I mean, the fact is, Brazil went to Poznan into Copenhagen. Lula breathed the air of the moral high ground. Brazil announced a national emissions reduction target, economy-wide, something far beyond not only what any developing country or any major developing country emitter has contemplated, far beyond what the United States has been able to commit to. And Brazil now has a law. I mean, they've transformed, which of course also has a great deal to do with this dynamic between Marina and the other candidates, and her kind of constantly forward-looking positions on these things. But Brazil now has not only a national law saying it has to reduce its emissions, which it can. There is no way it can do without substantially reducing Amazon deforestation. It has also built up really very considerable leadership on this in a multilateral forum that it takes very seriously based on that. So it's going to be difficult, I think, to just turn around and say, well, you know, that was the last administration.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. I'd like to make a question on maybe following on the path of the politics. How do you see that policy on reducing mostly illegal deforestation vis-a-vis the policy on development in the Amazon, which is not illegal? Like all the PAC, the Plano de Ação, or the IRSA projects that are in the Amazon. Do you see this new policy affecting these projects?
Yeah, usually there is a contradiction. There is not a very good integration between the people that are, you know, projecting roads or other development initiatives there, and when they go to, you know, to implement this, then comes Mink or whoever is in the ministry to deal with the problems. So the criticisms against these contradictions are growing. And these are what I was mentioned, public prosecutors, they are paying attention to this contradiction. Also the auditing office, because they deal with implementation of policies that are related to federal money. And they say, well, we have this policy here that goes against deforestation. This other one is promoting, you should integrate. This kind of debate is growing, but I would say that the integration is still weak. So in the end, you have this kind of conflict situation on the ground between government agencies. And I think one thing that may be new now with this kind of agreement related to beef is to force some of this coordination, because they are going to see, okay, I'm here to implement this road, but is having this kind of problem with people coming to occupy the land. I have to deal with the land issues. Maybe this is one result of this agreement is to promote some integration.
Follow up quickly. So do you see, like, taking into account the new debates on elections, do you see them discussing the IRSA projects, the integration of the Americas, and the PAC?
Well, I think the idea of this public infrastructure in the Amazon is going to continue. Everybody there asks for, infrastructure. I think and there are people showing the problems of this, so it's very lively a debate, including public prosecutors, NGOs, and everybody debate. I think is going to continue.
Well, I think with that we will have to close. Before closing, I'd like to make 3 announcements of upcoming events here at the Wilson Center at Brazil Institute. On March the 2nd, Professor Leslie Bethel is going to discuss a paper on Brazil and Latin America, Latin American quotation marks, historic perspective. If you think that Brazil is part of Latin America, come and we will talk to you. Professor Bethel has a very interesting approach to that. Yes, and if you think it is, you talk to him again. March 2nd. On March 12th, we are going to have, with the Latin American Program and the Brazil Institute, discussion on Brazil as an emerging power, how Brazilians see this and how others see Brazil, how people in South America, in Central America, in Mexico, in the United States see Brazil's rise and increasing role in the international arena. And also, please mark on your calendar, April 7th, we are going to have a debate on President Lula's legacy and the upcoming presidential elections in Brazil, so we will announce then the results. And you are all welcome to come. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paulo, for coming from Belém do Pará to participate with us in this, to enlighten us about this. Thank you, Steve, again for being such a good friend and to help make this, I think, a very interesting and informative session to all. Thank you on behalf of the Wilson Center and the Brazil Institute.
Thanks you.